Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried beneath battlefields that even the most advanced military technology cannot detect? What if I told you that in 1944, a single dog's refusal to move forward prevented not just a tragedy, but uncovered something so dangerous that it forced the complete evacuation of an entire military operation? Before we dive into this incredible story, I need your help. Please comment below and tell me where you're watching from. This channel depends on viewers like you to continue bringing these hidden wartime stories to light. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear has been kept quiet for decades, and we need your support to keep sharing these secret histories. The morning of October 17th, 1944 began like any other autumn day in northern France. The 3rd Battalion of the United States Army's 9th Infantry Division had been advancing steadily through the Hürtgen Forest region, pushing back German forces that had occupied the territory since the early days of the war. Captain James Eldridge, a 32-year-old officer from Augusta, Georgia, led a reconnaissance unit tasked with clearing a path through what intelligence reports suggested was a minefield protecting a strategic crossroads. With Captain Eldridge that morning was a 4-year-old German shepherd named Scout. The dog had been with the unit for 8 months, trained specifically in mine detection at the War Dog Training Center in Front Royal, Virginia. Scout had an impeccable record. In those 8 months, he had successfully identified 47 hidden explosives, saving countless lives. His handler, Private First Class Daniel Whitmore from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, trusted the animal with a faith that bordered on religious devotion. The air that morning carried the acrid smell of burnt gunpowder mixed with the earthy scent of wet leaves. A light fog hung between the trees, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 yards. The sound of distant artillery rumbled like approaching thunder, though the front line had supposedly moved 3 miles east the previous evening. Captain Eldridge's unit consisted of 12 men, moving in careful formation through terrain that had seen some of the fiercest fighting of the European campaign. Private Whitmore walked slightly ahead of the main group, Scout on a long lead, watching the dog's every movement. The animal had been trained to freeze when detecting the metallic signature of buried explosives. His ears would pin back, his tail would drop, and he would plant his paws and refuse to move forward. It was a behavior Whitmore had witnessed dozens of times, each instance potentially saving multiple lives. At approximately 0900 hours, Scout's behavior changed. But it wasn't the usual freeze response. The dog began to bark. Not the alert bark Whitmore had been trained to recognize, but something else entirely. Something frantic, almost desperate. Scout's front paws dug into the earth, his head lowered, and the barking intensified into a series of sharp, aggressive sounds that echoed through the morning fog. "Hold position," Captain Eldridge commanded, raising his fist. The unit stopped immediately, weapons ready, eyes scanning the tree line for enemy movement. The sudden barking could mean anything in this contested territory. German soldiers, a wounded animal, a trap. Private Whitmore approached slowly, speaking in the soft, reassuring tone he used to calm Scout during stressful situations. But the dog wouldn't be calmed. Scout's barking grew louder, more insistent. His paws scratched at the ground as if trying to dig through to something below. Whitmore knelt beside the animal, running his hand along Scout's back. The dog's muscles were rigid, trembling with an intensity Whitmore had never felt before. "Something's wrong, sir," Whitmore called back to Captain Eldridge. "This isn't his normal mine response. He's trying to tell us something." Captain Eldridge moved forward carefully, his boots crunching on the frost-covered leaves. The crossroads ahead was their objective, a junction of 2 dirt roads that provided access to 3 nearby villages. Intelligence had confirmed German forces had mined the approaches heavily before retreating. What they hadn't confirmed was exactly where those mines had been placed, or what kind of ordnance had been used. As Eldridge approached, he noticed something odd about the ground beneath Scout's paws. The earth appeared disturbed, but not recently. The displacement looked old, settled, with grass and small plants growing over whatever had been buried. Mine placements were usually more obvious, especially to trained detection dogs. This looked different. Wrong, somehow. "Get the metal detector up here," Eldridge ordered. Corporal Marcus Washington from Charleston, South Carolina, hustled forward with the SCR-625 mine detector, a cumbersome device that looked like a large dinner plate attached to a pole. He swept the area around Scout systematically. The detector's signal began chirping immediately, indicating metal beneath the surface. But the reading was strange. Instead of the sharp, localized ping of a single mine, the detector gave a continuous signal that extended in a rough circle approximately 15 feet in diameter. "Sir, I'm reading metal everywhere," Washington reported, confusion evident in his voice. "It's not concentrated. It's spread out, almost like a network." Scout continued barking, his paws now bleeding slightly from scratching at the hard earth. Private Whitmore tried to pull him back, but the dog resisted with surprising strength. In all their months together, Scout had never disobeyed a direct command. The animal's behavior was so unusual that even Captain Eldridge, who had limited experience with war dogs, recognized something was fundamentally wrong. "Everyone back 20 yards, Eldridge commanded. "Washington, mark this position. Whitmore, try to get Scout away from here." It took 2 soldiers to finally pull Scout back from the spot. The dog's barking had evolved into something that sounded almost like howling, a mournful sound that sent chills through every man present. When they finally got him to a safe distance, Scout collapsed, panting heavily, his eyes fixed on the disturbed earth as if watching something the humans couldn't see. Captain Eldridge radioed back to battalion headquarters, reporting the unusual find. The response came within minutes. Colonel Harrison Blackwell, commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, ordered them to hold position and await the arrival of combat engineers with specialized equipment. Something about Eldridge's description had triggered concern at the command level. The engineers arrived 90 minutes later, led by Lieutenant Robert Chen from San Francisco, California. Chen's team included specialists in explosive ordnance disposal and a portable fluoroscope unit, relatively new technology that could create X-ray images of buried objects without excavation. The fog had lifted by then, replaced by a gray, overcast sky that threatened rain. Lieutenant Chen began by conducting his own sweep with more sophisticated detection equipment. His findings confirmed Corporal Washington's initial assessment. The metal signatures beneath the ground formed an extensive network, far too complex to be a simple minefield. The fluoroscope unit, when positioned over Scout's original spot, revealed something that made Chen's face go pale. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen said quietly, motioning Captain Eldridge over to the fluoroscope's viewing screen. The image was grainy and difficult to interpret at first, but as Eldridge's eyes adjusted, he began to make out shapes, multiple shapes, cylindrical objects, interconnected by what appeared to be wiring or cables. And beneath those, something else. Something that looked disturbingly organic in contrast to the mechanical components above. "Are those what I think they are?" Eldridge asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lieutenant Chen nodded slowly. "If I'm reading this correctly, sir, those are human remains, multiple sets, and they appear to be positioned deliberately around the explosive devices." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. Every man present felt it. The realization of what lay beneath their feet. This wasn't just a minefield. This was something far more horrific. The Germans had done many terrible things during the war, but this exceeded even the darkest reports that had filtered back through intelligence channels. "How many?" Captain Eldridge asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Chen adjusted the fluoroscope, moving it to different positions around the site. With each new image, more details emerged. More remains. More explosive devices. The network extended in every direction, a carefully constructed web of death that had been waiting beneath innocent-looking Earth for months, perhaps longer. "Initial count, sir. At least 23 sets of remains. Could be more once we map the full extent." The words hung in the air like poison. 23 people. Buried with explosives. Whoever had constructed this monstrosity had turned human beings into components of a massive trap. The implications were staggering. This wasn't combat. This wasn't even the calculated brutality of war. This was something else entirely. Private Whitmore, still holding Scout's lead, felt his stomach turn. The dog had known. Somehow, Scout had sensed what lay beneath the ground. Not just the metal of the explosives, but something else. Some trace of humanity that his animal instincts had responded to with that desperate, frantic barking. Captain Eldridge made the decision quickly. "Lieutenant, I need you to map this entire area. Every inch. I'm calling for a full evacuation of the Crossroads objective. No one moves forward until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The next 6 hours were spent in careful, methodical documentation. The engineers expanded their survey, discovering that the initial 15-foot circle was just the beginning. The network of remains and explosives extended along both approaching roads, covering an area of approximately 4 acres. Whoever had constructed this nightmare had spent considerable time and resources creating what amounted to a massive killing field disguised as a minefield. As afternoon turned to evening, Lieutenant Chen made another disturbing discovery. The wiring connecting the explosives wasn't standard German military issue. The cables were too sophisticated, the connections too precise. This level of engineering suggested involvement from specialists, possibly scientists or researchers with expertise beyond normal military demolition. At 1700 hours, Captain Eldridge received new orders from Division Headquarters. A specialized investigation team was being dispatched from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the highest levels of Allied command in Europe. Whatever they had discovered was important enough to draw attention from General Eisenhower's staff. The captain was ordered to secure the perimeter and allow absolutely no one near the site until the investigation team arrived. That night, as darkness fell over the Hurtgen forest, the 12 men of Captain Eldridge's unit set up a cold camp 200 yards from the discovery site. No fires were permitted, no lights that might draw enemy attention. They sat in the darkness, each man alone with his thoughts about what lay buried beneath the earth so close by. Private Whitmore kept Scout close, the dog's behavior still unsettled. Scout would occasionally lift his head and look toward the site, ears perked, as if listening to something the humans couldn't hear. Once, around midnight, the dog began a low, sustained growl that lasted for several minutes before subsiding. "What is it, boy?" Whitmore whispered, running his hand along Scout's back. "What do you hear?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but in the silence of that French forest, with the knowledge of what lay buried just beyond the perimeter, Whitmore could have sworn he heard something. A sound so faint it might have been imagination. Something that sounded almost like breathing, like the earth itself was alive with the presence of the dead. The investigation team arrived at 0600 hours the following morning. 7 officers, including a British intelligence liaison, a French resistance representative, and 2 civilians whose credentials identified them only as War Crimes Documentation Unit. They were led by Major Elizabeth Hartwell, a sharp-eyed woman from Boston, Massachusetts, whose reputation for thoroughness had made her one of the most respected investigators in the European theater. Major Hartwell spent 3 hours examining Lieutenant Chen's documentation before she spoke to Captain Eldridge. When she finally did, her expression was grave. "Captain, what your unit has discovered is beyond anything we've encountered in this campaign," she began, her voice level but tense. "The preliminary assessment suggests this site is connected to a network of similar installations we've been tracking across occupied France. This isn't an isolated incident. This is part of something much larger." Eldridge felt ice form in his chest. "How much larger, ma'am?" "We've identified 12 similar sites over the past 4 months, all in territories recently liberated from German occupation, all following the same pattern: human remains integrated into explosive networks. The sophistication level is consistent across all sites, suggesting a single design authority." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "What makes your discovery unique, Captain, is the scale. The other sites we've found contained between 3 and 8 remains. Your site has 23, possibly more. This appears to be a central hub of some kind." The French resistance representative, a thin man who introduced himself only as Philippe, added his own observations. "We have reports from civilians in nearby villages, stories of disappearances between 1942 and 1943. People who left their homes one day and never returned. Germans claimed they were resistance fighters transported to labor camps. But we have found no records, no deportation orders. Nothing." "You're saying the people buried here might be local civilians?" Eldridge asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Philippe nodded. "It is possible. The timing matches. The numbers match. And the location matches areas where German engineering units were reported to be conducting what they called strategic installations." Major Hartwell pulled out a leather-bound notebook, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. "Captain, I'm going to need your complete cooperation. This investigation is now classified at the highest level. Nothing that has been discovered here can be discussed outside of official channels. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Eldridge replied, though he didn't understand at all. If German forces had done this, if they had murdered civilians and turned them into components of weapons, why would that need to be classified? Why wouldn't the Allies want the world to know about these atrocities? As if reading his thoughts, Major Hartwell continued, "The reason for classification isn't to hide what happened. It's to prevent panic. If word gets out that there are potentially dozens of these sites scattered across France, Belgium, and possibly the Netherlands, the civilian population might refuse to return to liberated territories. We need time to locate and neutralize all of them before we can make public statements." Over the next 5 days, an expanded team of engineers and investigators worked to carefully excavate the site. The process was painstaking, each layer of earth removed with archaeological precision. What they found confirmed the worst fears and raised new questions that nobody could answer. The remains were indeed civilians. 27 individuals in total, not 23 as initially estimated. Men, women, and 3 children. All had been deceased before burial, killed by what the medical examiner determined to be single gunshot wounds to the back of the head. The bodies had been positioned at specific angles around a central cluster of explosives, each corpse serving as both concealment and trigger mechanism for the devices. But the most disturbing discovery came from the personal effects found with the remains. Documents, letters, photographs. One letter in particular, found in the pocket of a man identified through his papers as Michel Dubois, a schoolteacher from the village of Étain, 12 miles south of the site, haunted everyone who read it. To whoever finds this, the letter read in French, later translated by Philippe. If you are reading these words, then I am dead, and my family is dead. We were taken by German soldiers on the evening of March 19th, 1943. They told us we were being relocated to a work camp. They lied. We were brought to this forest and told we would be part of something that would protect German forces for years to come. They made us dig our own graves. They told us our deaths would serve a purpose. I do not know what purpose murder can serve. I write this only so someone will know we existed, so someone will know we were more than tools of war. My name is Michel Dubois. I was a teacher. I had a wife, Marie, and a daughter, Sophie, who was 7 years old. Remember us. The letter was dated March 21st, 1943. Michel Dubois had carried it in his pocket for 2 days between his abduction and his death, knowing what was coming, hoping someone would find his words. Major Hartwell ordered the letter photographed and logged as evidence. But she also ordered something else. She ordered every member of the investigation team to read it, to understand that this wasn't about explosives or military strategy. This was about humanity stolen and weaponized. Private Whitmore read the letter sitting beside Scout, the dog's head resting in his lap. Tears ran down his face, dripping onto Scout's fur. The animal looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and Whitmore realized that Scout hadn't just detected metal in the ground. The dog had sensed something far more profound. A wrongness, a violation of everything natural and decent. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Whitmore whispered. "You knew they were there." As excavation continued, the engineering team made another troubling discovery. The explosive network was designed with a secondary trigger system, one that wouldn't have been activated by normal mine-sweeping operations. The system was set to detonate only when excavation reached a certain depth, approximately 4 feet below the surface. This meant the mines weren't designed to kill soldiers advancing across the battlefield. They were designed to kill whoever tried to recover the bodies. It was a level of cruelty that exceeded military necessity. The Germans who constructed this site didn't just want to kill Allied soldiers. They wanted to kill anyone who showed mercy to the dead, anyone who tried to give these murdered civilians proper burial. Lieutenant Chen brought this information to Major Hartwell on the evening of October 23rd. The major stood in the command tent, studying the technical diagrams Chen had prepared, her face illuminated by the harsh light of a kerosene lamp. Rain hammered against the canvas overhead, a steady drumbeat that seemed to echo the darkness of their discoveries. "How many other sites have this secondary trigger?" Hartwell asked, her voice steady despite the implications. "We don't know, ma'am," Chen admitted. "We'd have to re-examine every site previously documented. But if I had to guess, based on the sophistication we've seen here, I'd say all of them. Whoever designed these systems didn't want the dead to be recovered. Ever." Major Hartwell closed her eyes for a moment, a rare display of emotion from a woman known for her professional detachment. That changes everything. We're not just dealing with murder and military strategy. We're dealing with deliberate desecration, with the intentional denial of dignity even in death. She turned to the British liaison officer, Captain Geoffrey Thornton from London, who had been silently observing the conversation. "Captain, I need you to contact your superiors in military intelligence. There's a pattern here that extends beyond combat operations. This level of planning, this deliberate cruelty, it suggests the involvement of specialized personnel, possibly scientists or engineers with backgrounds in psychology as well as demolition." Captain Thornton nodded grimly. "I've already sent preliminary reports. The response from London was immediate. They want samples of the trigger mechanisms. They want complete documentation of the site layout. And they want it yesterday. "Why the urgency?" Chan asked. Thornton hesitated, glancing at Major Hartwell before continuing. "Because we've received reports of similar installations in Poland, in territories being liberated by Soviet forces. The Russians aren't sharing detailed information, but what little they've revealed suggests the same methods, the same signature. If this is connected to what we've found here, we could be looking at hundreds of sites across Europe, possibly thousands." The implications hung in the tent, like the smoke from the lamp. Thousands of sites, thousands of murdered civilians, tens of thousands of remains weaponized and scattered across a continent. The scope was almost impossible to comprehend. Major Hartwell made a decision that would reshape the entire investigation. "We need to trace the origin. Every component in these devices was manufactured somewhere. Every piece of wire, every explosive charge, every trigger mechanism. They came from factories, supply depots, requisition orders. Someone ordered this, someone designed it, and someone implemented it across multiple countries. We find that chain of command. We find out how deep this goes." Over the next 2 weeks, as excavation continued at the Hurtgen Forest site, a parallel investigation began across the Allied command structure. War crimes documentation units interviewed captured German prisoners. Intelligence officers analyzed recovered documents from abandoned headquarters. Factory records were examined in liberated territories. Slowly, painfully, a picture began to emerge. The program had a name: Project Evacuation, Project Eternal Guardians. It had been initiated in early 1942 by a special division within the SS, specifically the Amped 7th Section, responsible for written records and ideological research. But the operational control had been transferred to a civilian contractor, a munitions engineering firm called Hartmann Industrial Solutions, based in Stuttgart. The name Hartmann appeared in countless requisition orders, wire specifications matching the site's components, explosive compounds with unique chemical signatures. Even the trigger mechanisms bore manufacturing marks traced back to Hartmann facilities. But here, the trail became complicated. Hartmann Industrial Solutions had been a legitimate engineering company before the war, specializing in mining equipment and industrial explosives. The company's transformation into a weapons contractor seemed to coincide with the arrival of a new director of research in January 1942. His name was Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, a mechanical engineer who had published papers on autonomous systems and remote detonation before the war. But Dr. Reinhardt's background included something unusual for an engineer. He had studied psychology at the University of Vienna in the 1920s, focusing on what he called psychological landscape modification. His doctoral thesis, recovered from university archives by Allied investigators, bore a chilling title: "The Dead as Deterrent, Utilizing Human Psychological Responses to Mortality in Defensive Strategy." Major Hartwell obtained a translated copy of key excerpts from Reinhardt's thesis. She read them alone in her tent, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages. "The human mind," Reinhardt had written, "possesses an instinctive aversion to proximity with the deceased. This response transcends cultural boundaries and represents one of the few truly universal psychological constants. Strategic application of this principle in defensive installations creates a psychological barrier far more effective than physical obstacles. Soldiers advancing across terrain known to contain human remains experience measurable increases in stress responses, decreased decision-making capability, and reduced combat effectiveness. The integration of mortality-based deterrence into standard defensive systems represents a paradigm shift in strategic thinking. The thesis had been written in 1928, 16 years before the Hurtgen Forest discovery. Reinhardt had been theorizing about weaponizing human psychology, and the presence of the dead long before the war gave him the opportunity to implement his ideas. But the thesis also contained a passage that made Major Hartwell's blood run cold. A footnote on page 47, easily overlooked but devastating in its implications. Secondary applications of this principle extend beyond immediate deterrence. The footnote read, "The knowledge that excavation or recovery operations will result in additional casualties creates a permanent psychological barrier. Even after hostilities cease, affected territories remain contaminated not merely with explosive devices, but with the psychological weight of unrecovered remains. This creates long-term strategic advantages as populations avoid areas where their dead lie trapped, effectively denying enemy use of those territories indefinitely. The dead, properly weaponized, become eternal guardians of strategic locations." Eternal Guardians. The name of the project wasn't random. It was Reinhardt's own concept, written in academic language years before the SS gave him the resources to make it reality. Major Hartwell brought this information to a classified briefing on November 8, 1944. Present were senior officers from American, British, and French military intelligence, along with representatives from the nascent United Nations War Crimes Commission. The briefing took place in a heavily guarded chateau 20 miles behind the front lines. "Gentlemen," Major Hartwell began, "we're not dealing with isolated atrocities. We're dealing with a systematic program designed by a man who understood exactly how to weaponize human compassion and dignity. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt created a system where the simple act of trying to recover the dead becomes an act of warfare. And based on the documentation we've recovered, he succeeded beyond anything we initially understood." She displayed a map on the wall, marked with pins representing confirmed Evacuation sites. France had 16 confirmed locations. Belgium had 7. The Netherlands had 3. And those were only the sites that had been discovered. Intelligence estimates suggested there could be 50 to 70 additional sites still hidden across Western Europe alone. The Soviet reports from Poland indicate at least 30 more sites in their liberation zones. Major Hartwell continued. "If we extrapolate across all German-occupied territories, we could be looking at 200 or more installations. That represents potentially thousands of casualties deliberately positioned to kill anyone who tries to recover them." A French colonel, whose name was recorded only as Beaumont in the briefing notes, stood abruptly. "This is beyond war crimes. This is systematic desecration. How do we respond to something like this?" The room fell silent. That was the question nobody could answer. Traditional war crimes prosecution focused on identifiable perpetrators committing specific acts. But Project Evacuation was different. It was systematic, bureaucratic, and implemented across multiple countries by multiple units. The chain of command was deliberately obscured through the use of civilian contractors. And the architect of the entire program, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, had disappeared from Stuttgart in March 1944, 7 months before the Hurtgen Forest discovery. British intelligence had traced Reinhardt's movements to Berlin, then to Prague, then to a facility near Krakow in occupied Poland. After that, the trail went cold. Either Reinhardt had been killed in the fighting, or he had successfully fled to avoid prosecution. Without him, without testimony explaining the full scope and purpose of the program, much of what they had discovered would remain incomplete. Meanwhile, back at the Hurtgen Forest site, Private Whitmore and Scout continued their assigned duties. The dog had become something of a legend among the troops stationed around the excavation area. Word had spread about how Scout had detected something no human instruments could have found until it was too late. Soldiers would visit just to see the animal, to touch him, as if Scout possessed some protective quality that might transfer to them. But Whitmore noticed changes in Scout's behavior. The dog had become withdrawn, less responsive to commands. He slept poorly, often waking in the night with small whimpers and trembling. Twice, Scout had tried to return to the excavation site despite direct commands to stay away. It was as if the dog remained connected to something there, something that called to him in ways Whitmore couldn't understand. A military veterinarian, Captain Sarah Morrison from Portland, Oregon, examined Scout on November 10th. She found nothing physically wrong with the animal. His health was excellent, but his psychological state showed clear signs of trauma. "It's not uncommon," Captain Morrison explained to Whitmore. "Dogs are sensitive to human emotional states. They respond to fear, stress, grief. Your dog spent 8 months successfully identifying threats and being rewarded for it. Then he identified something so wrong, so fundamentally disturbing, that it broke the normal reward pattern. He knows something terrible is at that site. He knows it involves death, and he doesn't understand why he can't fix it." "Can he recover?" Whitmore asked, his hand resting on Scout's head. Morrison paused before answering. "Physically, yes. But mentally? I don't know. Some dogs exposed to extreme trauma never fully return to normal. They carry it with them, just like soldiers do." The excavation of the Hurtgen Forest site was completed on November 15, 1944. All 27 sets of remains were recovered and prepared for proper burial. The explosive network was dismantled carefully, each device documented and removed. The secondary triggers that would have killed recovery workers were defused. The site was declared secure. A memorial service was held on November 17th, exactly 1 month after Scout's initial discovery. Captain Eldridge, Private Whitmore, and the other members of the original unit attended, along with Major Hartwell and members of the investigation team. Philippe, the French resistance representative, had arranged for family members of the identified victims to attend. The bodies of Michel Dubois, his wife Marie, and their daughter Sophie were among those recovered. They would be buried together in the village cemetery at Étain. Father Patrick O'Malley, a Catholic chaplain from Chicago, Illinois, presided over the service. He stood before the assembled mourners, his words carried away by the cold November wind. "We gather here to honor those who were taken from us, not in combat, but in calculated cruelty," Father O'Malley said. "These men, women, and children were murdered and then denied even the dignity of proper rest. Their deaths were compounded by the desecration of their remains. But today, through the courage of soldiers and the determination of investigators, they are finally free. They are finally at peace." He paused, looking at the faces of the family members, seeing grief mixed with something else. Relief, perhaps, or vindication that their loved ones had not simply disappeared into nothing. "Evil exists in this world," the chaplain continued. "We have seen its face in the ashes of this war, but we have also seen something else. We have seen that evil cannot ultimately triumph over the human capacity for compassion, for mercy, for the simple act of caring for the dead. Those who designed this horror wanted to make even mercy a weapon against us, but they failed. We are here. We remember, and we will not allow cruelty to have the final word." Private Whitmore stood with Scout at his side, the dog unusually calm during the ceremony. As Father O'Malley spoke the final blessing, Whitmore felt Scout lean against his leg, a gesture of trust and solidarity. The dog understood in his own way that something important was happening, that the wrongness he had sensed was being addressed, if not fully corrected. But as the mourners dispersed and the military vehicles prepared to leave the site, Major Hartwell received a coded message from intelligence headquarters. She read it twice, her expression darkening with each reading. She found Captain Eldridge near his jeep, preparing to return to battalion. "Captain, I need a moment," she said quietly, pulling him aside where others couldn't hear. "Yes, ma'am? We've received confirmation from British intelligence. They've located records from the Hartmann Industrial Solutions facility in Stuttgart. Production records, specifically, for Project Evacuation components." Eldridge waited, sensing there was more. The records indicate production continued until late July 1944, more than 4 months after Dr. Reinhardt disappeared. Someone else was running the program. Someone who's still out there. "Do we know who?" Major Hartwell shook her head. "The records only show a signature, an initial. The letter R. Not Reinhardt. Someone else with access to his designs, his methods. Someone who continued the program even as Germany was losing the war. Tutti. The implications settled over them like fog. Project Evacuation hadn't ended with Reinhardt's disappearance. It had continued. And that meant there could be more sites they hadn't discovered yet. More victims buried with explosives. More traps waiting for anyone merciful enough to try to recover the dead. "What do we do?" Eldridge asked. "We keep looking," Hartwell replied. "We find every site. We recover every victim. And we don't stop until we know the full extent of what they did." In the months that followed, Allied forces discovered 43 more Evacuation sites across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Each followed the same pattern. Civilian victims, sophisticated explosive networks. Secondary triggers designed to kill recovery workers. The psychological impact on Allied soldiers was measurable. Units became hesitant to advance through certain terrain. Engineers spent weeks longer than necessary clearing areas suspected of contamination. Dr. Reinhardt's prediction about long-term strategic advantages was proving accurate even as Germany collapsed. But some sites were never found. Some remain hidden even today, buried beneath forests and fields, waiting. Farmers in certain regions of rural France report areas where nothing grows properly, where dogs refuse to walk, where the earth feels wrong somehow, though they can't explain why. Local legends have emerged about cursed ground, about places where the war never ended. The identity of the mysterious R, who continued Reinhardt's work after his disappearance, was never confirmed. The Stuttgart facility records were destroyed in an Allied bombing raid in December 1944, eliminating any possibility of tracing the production orders further. Dr. Klaus Reinhardt himself was never found. Some historians believe he died during the siege of Berlin. Others suggest he escaped to South America along with other Nazi officials. A few persistent researchers claim he may have been recruited by Allied intelligence services. His expertise in psychological warfare too valuable to lose to prosecution. What is known for certain is this: the Project Evacuation represented a fundamental shift in how cruelty could be systematized and deployed. It took the universal human desire to honor the dead and turned that desire into a weapon. It created a form of warfare that extended beyond the battlefield, beyond the end of hostilities, into an indefinite future where merely showing compassion could be fatal. Private Daniel Whitmore and Scout both survived the war. They returned to Louisiana in June 1945. Scout lived another 8 years, passing away peacefully in Whitmore's home in 1953. Until his death, the dog would occasionally wake in the night and stand at the window, ears perked, as if listening to something far away. Whitmore would wake with him, place a hand on the dog's back, and whisper reassurances into the darkness. Captain James Eldridge continued serving in the Army until 1962, retiring with the rank of colonel. He never spoke publicly about what he found in the Hurtgen forest. When asked about his war experiences, he would simply say that he saw things that should never be forgotten, but which were too heavy to carry in casual conversation. Major Elizabeth Hartwell became one of the lead investigators for the Nuremberg trials, though her work on Project Evacuation remained classified until 1997. She spent the rest of her life advocating for the recovery and proper burial of war victims. She died in 2003 at the age of 87, still believing there were sites left undiscovered. The Hurtgen Forest site itself was decommissioned and returned to civilian use in 1951. A small memorial stands near the location where Scout first began barking on that October morning in 1944. The inscription reads simply, "To those who were lost, and those who found them." But here is what was never made public, what remains classified even in documents that have been partially declassified. In 1968, during routine forestry work in the same region, equipment operators reported unusual ground conditions. The earth seemed hollow in certain spots. Dogs brought to the site reacted with extreme agitation. A quiet investigation was conducted. No public announcements were made, and in 1992, a farmer clearing land for expansion near Étain reported similar phenomena: hollowness beneath the soil, unusual metal detector readings. His dog, a Belgian Malinois, refused to cross a certain section of field, behaving exactly as Scout had behaved 48 years earlier. The farmer reported it to local authorities. The report disappeared into bureaucratic channels and was never followed up. Are there still sites out there? Still victims waiting to be found? Still traps set by hands long dead, waiting for the mercy of those who would give the deceased proper rest? The official answer is no. All Project Evacuation sites have been located and cleared. The program ended in 1944. Dr. Reinhardt is dead. The mysterious R either never existed or died long ago. The dead are at peace, but dogs still refuse to walk through certain forests in France, certain fields in Belgium, certain roads in the Netherlands. And when they stop, when they plant their paws and refuse to move forward, when they begin that frantic, desperate barking that sounds almost like warning, almost like grief, people remember. They remember that once, a dog named Scout saved lives by sensing something humans could not detect. They remember that beneath innocent earth, horror waited patiently for mercy to spring the trap. And they wonder what else might be waiting beneath other innocent earth, in other forests, in other fields, across a continent scarred by a war that may never fully end. In this world, evil takes many forms. Some are obvious, confronted and defeated in battles we can see and understand. But others are subtle, buried, waiting. They persist in dark places, in forgotten corners, in ground that seems peaceful but holds secrets. The only true defense against such persistent evil is vigilance, remembrance, the refusal to forget what happened, and the determination to keep searching for those still lost. But even more than vigilance, we need faith. Faith that light can penetrate even the deepest darkness. Faith that compassion is stronger than cruelty. Faith that in the end, truth will be revealed, and justice will be served, if not by human hands, then by a higher power that sees all and forgets nothing. If you are reading this, if you have listened to this story, then you carry part of that responsibility now. Remember, Scout, remember the 27 victims found beneath the earth. Remember Dr. Reinhardt and the program he created. Remember that evil innovates, but so does courage. Remember that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources, from a dog's instinct and a soldier's willingness to listen. And if you ever find yourself in those forests, in those fields, in places where the earth feels wrong and dogs refuse to walk, remember that some grounds should not be disturbed without preparation. Some mysteries should not be explored without wisdom. And some darkness should be brought into the light only with prayer. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. Because in a world where humans can conceive of such calculated cruelty, where mercy itself can be weaponized, where the dead can be denied peace for strategic advantage, only faith in something greater than ourselves can provide the strength to face such darkness without being consumed by it. Only faith can give us the courage to keep searching for the lost, to keep honoring the dead, to keep believing that love and compassion and human dignity are worth defending even when the cost is high and the enemy is patient and the battle seems endless. Scout knew something was wrong beneath that earth in October 1944. He could not explain it. He could only warn. We must be willing to listen to such warnings, wherever they come from. And we must be willing to do the hard work of bringing hidden evil into the light, trusting that the light will always, ultimately, prove stronger than the darkness that hides from it.